Now, I guarantee you're not going to be smiling at the end of this sermon. Not if I do my job right. But I hope you'll be thinking. And I do this with a lot of internal fear and trepidation because as those of you who've been coming to church each week, the last several weeks, you've heard this theme of what it means to have to forgive people, and what it means to really be a disciple. How do you walk it? How do you live it? And this is probably one of the toughest. If not for you, certainly for me. I asked the 4 young people before we began the liturgy this morning, I said to them, what's your limit? How often do you have to be hurt before you say enough? And I heard some very real and reasonable conclusions. You know, how many times does the same person have to hurt you before you say, I've had it? Okay? And I could share personal stories that I'm not going to do. But I do know for myself, do I struggle with holding on to a grudge? Yeah, I do. It's easier to deal with that now that I'm older, but not much easier. So I sit back and I'm going to take the scriptures exactly as they are and I'm going to share them with you, and I want you to hear, and I don't want you to shake your head yes or no and say yes. I want you to take it to heart. Don't worry about your head. First of all, I want to thank Peter, not Peter Bates, although I do thank you for being a reader today. But Peter, who follows Jesus, because no one human being has managed to say so many stupid things from which a good teaching has come. And it's almost like he was a prop created to do this. But apparently that's the type of person he was. Okay? And there are people that probably you have met who have a way of putting their foot in their mouth. The one I know of best of all is the one who looks back at me from the mirror. But Peter comes and he says to Jesus, thinking he's saying something significant, hey, like I asked you for, how many times do you have to say enough to be hurt before you say enough is enough? How many times do I have to forgive? And then he does one of those things that really gets under my skin. He answers his own question. Okay? So if you were really going to ask the question, why do you give the answer? You're not really interested in what the response is. What you want to do is justify your own opinion. So I'm always listening for people who answer their own questions. It's always going on. Okay? And what he does, he says, how about 7 times? Let me tell you how his mind is working. In the Old Testament, in one of the books of the prophets, I think it's Amos, there is this very beautiful poetic section, goes on for a lot of chapters, where in the voice of God through the poetry says, and I forgave this people 3 times, and I forgave this people 3 times, and I forgave this people 3 times. 3 is a good number. We heard that number this morning before you went out, okay? So what's Peter doing? I'm going to prove I'm twice as good as God. If God can forgive 3 times, I'm going to forgive at least 6 times. Matter of fact, why not make it 7? And that's how he responds. And he's looking for a compliment. And Jesus just pulls the rug from all under his feet and just pulls it out and says, no. And your translation, the more modern translation, says 77 times. The ancient texts argue with each other. One says 70 times 7, one says 77. It doesn't make any difference. That's not the point. The point is Jesus gives this absurd number. This number that says there is no limitation. In the human world, 3 strikes and you're out. In God's world, forgiveness is something totally different. And we who call ourselves disciples, who are followers of Jesus, are supposed to model ourselves upon what he teaches and how he lived. So Jesus tells a story, as he always does. And the story is meant to be absurd and way out of proportion and made to make us think. I am so glad they used the original money amounts, because modern translations that give a financial amount to the story lose the whole point. Jesus said, once upon a time there was a king, and as a person owed him 10,000 talents. Now a talent is not a unit of money. A talent is the amount of money you would make if you worked every day for 15 years. Your annual salary times 15. So do that number in your heads, okay? 1 talent is 15 years' wages. The Roman government, when it taxed the province they call Palestine, didn't get 1,000 talents out of those people combined. And Jesus said, there was once a guy who owed his boss 10,000 talents. That's 150,000 years worth of debt, if you were capable of living that long. A denarius was 1 day's wage. The smaller debt was basically 100 days. 150,000 years, 100 days. Yes, the absurdity. That's the way he plays this out. And the point he's making is, in God's eyes, not looking at the world as we look at it, but looking at us as God looks at us, our debt to God falls in the larger number. We can't possibly pay God back for what God has done for us. God's love, God's mercy, God sending his presence, his Son, to redeem us, is a debt we cannot pay. It is impossible. And if God forgives us with unlimited love, what is our responsibility to forgive each other? That's the point. And the second half of that point is this, the wisdom, many of you have gotten this already. Why does he want us to forgive? Because if you keep the poison inside of you, ultimately, you're the one who gets destroyed. Forgiveness frees you. That person may never be truly sorry. That person may be the lowest form of life on this planet, and you may be right in thinking that. I said that last week. But that's not the point. The point is you need to be forgiven, and you need to be freed from the pain and the poison that holding on to that hatred does to a person. And then Jesus said very simply, here it is. My Father loves you, he forgives you. You must forgive each other, and if you don't, you will be accountable for that. That's St. Paul's teaching, that's Jesus' teaching, that's the teaching I'm hearing. So I have no cute story, no one-liner, no punchline. In your heart, who are the people who need your forgiveness? Who are the people to whom you should be asking forgiveness? And how often do we do it? 7 times? Great number. But if you're a disciple and you take it seriously, the call is so much harder. That's why we pray for the power of grace and the power of God's Spirit. Be willing to forgive, but know that the cost if you don't is eternal.